And Chris has contributed a lot of his thought leadership around social innovation help to both of the cohorts of Nurse First, and he's inspired a huge amount of people to rethink what they mean about community and what they think about innovation and health. So with no further ado, I'll hand over to Chris.
Number of apologies, I'm not a nurse, nor a clinician. This room used to have stars in the ceiling, if I remember rightly. So I was thinking about doing that Oscar Wilde thing of we're all in the gutter, but some of us looking at the stars. I can't. So we're just up the road in Salford, the city they built Manchester next to. And I'm just hopefully going to share a bit of an offering which hopefully will be of use to you. Just a very little bit about our organisation. Unlimited Potential, we're a social enterprise specialised in social innovation, and we've started to be recognised for some of the innovation that we're doing. And although as a social organisation, particularly proud that the parts of the private sector are now recognising that what we're doing is equally valid to people working in technological and scientific innovation. Some of the challenges we've got as the UK and indeed as the world, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but we've got one or two things to deal with. Big message for me, anything to do with the 20th century's history. Anything about thinking in the way that we used to think is already history. How we thought in 2005 is history. We need to look the other way and start to look at different solutions, including in the areas of health and social care. That is the first ever car was designed in Sweden in the late 19th century. You can sort of see what they had in mind. If you stick a horse on the front, you can still see a carriage. I like to use this one because they were trying to innovate and build a car. What they actually did was take a carriage and took the horse off the front, which is why it still doesn't really look like a car. And there's something in this process of innovation about how far can you think beyond how you normally think. Most of you, I guess, will hear people like me who wear suits and ties and do management things. Often people talk about thinking outside the box. I believe there is no box. If you already think there's a box, you've already limited your thinking. They already had a box. They could have designed anything, but they actually designed a horseless carriage. The other thing, even people have great ideas get it wrong. So the guy who invented the telephone thought maybe every town might need one phone. Why would anybody want to talk to each other down a line? So equally, Bill Gates nearly missed the internet, even though he'd done all this great stuff around IT, computers and so on. So it's also thinking about what's the actual application of these things and being able to think beyond just what you invent. So what is all this stuff? These are a couple of definitions of social innovation. It's still very, very new and emerging, but essentially it's utilising innovation through social means and using social assets to achieve that. But in a way, it's the bottom line that's perhaps most important. It's innovation that leaves behind a stronger capacity for society to act. That's what distinguishes it from technological innovation. It's about enabling people to do stuff for themselves. So one of my aims, and anybody that we employ in Unlimited Potential, one of the things I always end up saying to them, you'll know you've done a good job when people tell you to get lost. I don't need you anymore, thank you very much. And traditionally the health and social care system has had a tendency to hold on to people, never let them go, particularly if you've got mental health issues or certain disabilities. I think what we should be aiming for is to that point where they say, right, I'm off now, thank you very much. I've got a life to live. I'm not just a patient. There are other things in my life to do, and you've now given me that capacity to take control of my life again. So that's sort of what I mean by social innovation. It's got a long, long history, and I'm not going to go through all of these, because most of them you'll be aware of. But up the road in Rochdale, if you ever get a chance to go up to there, there's a place called Toad Lane. Rochdale Pioneers Museum. 28 guys in Rochdale in the 1840s who thought there might be a different way of running the economy. created a thing that's now called the Cooperative Group, which is worth £1 billion a year. It was one very small idea and a few very committed people who changed the world. And they're still doing that 170, 180 years later. Right the way through to things like public libraries, which was invented in Salford, as was health visiting. Most things eventually come out of Salford in one way or another. But even things like consumerism, human rights, distance learning. The guy who invented the Open University had the idea back in the 50s, early 60s, said, we're going to run a university over television. If you remember what TV was like in the 1950s, that was mad. That made no sense at all. It's now the biggest university in Europe. It's normal. And so it shows that you can change things. It's about how you can think beyond how most other people think. More up to date, another list there. The one at the end, which you may or may not have heard of, a Danish company called Specialist. A businessman, he has a son with Asperger's syndrome and was becoming concerned about what's going to happen to my son when he grows up or when I die. And instead of seeing the disability, if you like, that his son had, he thought about what people with Asperger's syndrome offer. And often what they're really good at is detail. So he created a company which only employs people with Asperger's. And they specialise in detail. And because they're really good at detail, they beat other companies in the marketplace. And all these people have jobs. He designed a nice environment which was appropriate for them. And they're now operating not only in Denmark, in Glasgow, in North America and so on. And I think part of what this is all about is seeing what people bring, what assets they have, not their needs. Everybody has something to offer as long as you're breathing. And to see what some of those people are now capable of doing in places like Specialist is really, really inspiring. So broadly, the model that we try to use at Unlimited Potential at the moment has these 4 basic stages. Generating the new ideas, and for us that's about starting with those social assets. So even in areas like Salford, we were on the news this morning, we're apparently the 4th worst place in England for health or something. And apparently we've got to do something about alcohol and the rest of it, like we didn't know that. But the problem is often, certainly places like Salford, it's always portraying the problems, the deficits, the needs. It's very rarely about what do we have, what do we know, what people are capable of, and what can we do with those resources and assets and strengths. And it's amazing the sort of solutions you can come up with if you start from that perspective rather than the traditional needs approach. We develop concepts. We try and prove those concepts and particularly focus on, is this making a difference? What's the impact? If that works, it doesn't always, failure is really, really important. I like failure because it means we're trying hard enough. If everything works, then we're probably getting a bit too mainstream. But for those things that work, how can we then develop and improve and incubate those ideas? How can we add some more social value in? How can we look at things like creating jobs for local people, for example, not just the initial outcome of the idea? And then how is it possible to replicate? And one of the real challenges I think we have in innovation generally, but in social innovation in particular, is how can you get beyond just it being one nice project in one small district? If we're about changing the world, we have to change the world. So although my organisation is based in Salford, we want to change the world. How do we make sure ideas can spread? How can we make sure that happens in Finland, in Australia, in Africa, if we've got a really, really good idea? That's a really hard bit. And that's often where we need help and support. A few current examples. These are things we're already doing. We've run projects around increasing access to care for people who've got symptoms of cancer or heart disease. Surprisingly, people out in the real world tend not to want to talk about cancer or heart disease very much. So we use things like plastic dogs and games of snakes and ladders and fun stuff, and then build the messages in and use psychology to engage people and utilise the skills of other local people to engage their peers. And for example, with the project we've been running for cancer, the early diagnosis rate, purely through using those slightly silly approaches, meant that the early diagnosis rate of early cancer, for lung cancer, bowel cancer and so on, went up somewhere in the region of 25% in 1 year. So these slightly daft ideas can lead to really hard outcomes, and the sort of things that accountants like, because we can start to show them how it's going to save money and reduce demand on services. We're developing, with a number of other social enterprises, a new service called Being Well Salford, which is about lay people coaching other lay people with multiple risk factors for health. Slightly alarmingly, for those of you who read the Daily Mail, and I'm sure there's many of you, it got a great write-up in the Daily Mail last week by Janet Street Porter, which worries me. I think they're probably not doing well enough. We've also been looking at things like men's health, men's well-being, and for many men with mental health issues, they tend not to come to see their GP. They certainly don't want to go to mental health services in the main until their problems are extreme. We found there's three things basically most blokes like: beer, sex, football. We happen to use football for this purpose, which is probably a relief. And we basically run self-development, self-management courses in football stadia using football language in very masculine environments where men will come and talk about themselves. But we talk about goalkeeping and tactics and how to score goals and all that sort of stuff, the sort of thing that blokes tend to like to talk about. And we've got evidence at the end that their mental well-being and their employability and their social connectedness have all increased. And 3 months after that course, they have maintained that level. Up in Rochdale, where we're running one of the programs, initially the lead GP for mental health didn't believe the numbers he was seeing that we were creating with those people. Again, it's a bit daft at first, but if it's engaging people, if it makes a difference, it doesn't matter. The daftness actually may help. So it's thinking like an 8-year-old is one of the things that I often advocate. Equally, we're doing some stuff around how to reduce smoking. We've got a service which requires a 10-minute intervention by a layperson with other lay people. We get them to talk about what they love. They're not interested in talking about smoking. They know smoking is bad for them. That's not changed their behaviour. Often it's about the impact on their kids, pets. If you smoke at home and you have a dog or a cat, it is 50% more likely to get cancer. If you have a parrot or a bird, you are guaranteed to kill it. It's amazing how much motivation that gives many people. And they will sign up and say, I'm going to change my smoking behaviour. And it didn't require a clinic. It didn't require actually any building at all. We're doing this in marketplaces, outside school gates. And the sort of thing which really engages people, but it starts from the reality of their lives, rather than necessarily what the institutions want. A few new examples. We're looking at a process which is called positive deviance to see if we can engage dads, looking at the impact of improving fathering on the health and well-being of young children by looking at the dads who are already doing really well in so-called deprived neighbourhoods, but seeing there are certain neighbourhoods that are just doing better year after year after year in terms of child health and well-being. We want to test out whether it's something we can learn from those fathers who are already doing really well. And can we almost infect other dads with that positive parenting? We're going to be doing a project up in East Lancashire, around Burnley, probably, with people with dementia. And we're going to give them a design. We'll get a group of people with dementia together. We're going to give them a design. I'm going to let them design the future. We're not going to ask the carers, or health and social care agencies, or anybody else, because it's not their lives. We want people with dementia to tell us what the future ought to look like. And I know from past experience, actually what people with dementia talk about is things like interpersonal relationships and having a valued social role. Is life worth living? Their future will look very, very different from what the NHS and social care would design for them. And hopefully we'll also be working alongside commissioners to help them to learn how to decommission creatively to create the future that people want. one of those things that the stuff was on the BBC this morning, Salford is top of many leagues, but one of them is alcohol-related hospital admissions. We've just gone past Blackpool and Manchester in the league table. There's one point in our city, within 1,000 metres of this particular bridge, there are 77 licensed alcohol outlets. And we wonder why we've got an alcohol problem. It doesn't matter how many alcohol services we develop, it's not going to address the problem. So what we're looking to do, and we're working with the Design Council, to see if we can come up with a new type of retail outlet that will help to address the root causes of alcohol problems, which local people basically tell us are isolation, boredom and loneliness. Alcohol isn't the problem. Rotten lives are the problem. Having things to do, whether or not you've got a meaningful life, that will reduce your drinking. So what we're trying to do is to see if we can create a retail environment where people want to come pay us to reduce their drinking, because they're having fun. We're trialling a competition at the moment, so any of you, I know you're all here as bright sparks. We've got 2 more competitions to run. We're in a new experiment with a couple of foundation trusts in the northwest, where we're getting the trusts to tell us what their problems are, and then asking local people and others if they've got solutions. Completely open competition, just run over the internet as well as locally, to see if local people could solve foundation trusts' problems rather than the other way around. We've got our first session with the foundation trust on Friday with our shortlisted sparks. Somebody who lives about half a mile from the hospital, right the way through to somebody in New Zealand who's got a great idea as well. And to see if we can get very large institutions to take both social innovation and indeed local people and lay people seriously with the ideas that they've got to offer. One of the really important things with that is about how those social spark plugs, as I call them, can link with the spark plugs inside the NHS and inside social care. What we know is, in terms of changing systems and having systemic innovation, what's really important is having some innovators, entrepreneurs outside, linking with innovators and entrepreneurs inside. That's actually what makes stuff happen. People like me, I can't make big scale change happen. I need people inside the system who do that. Equally, I've got the freedom to take bigger risks than people working inside the system. If we work together, we can achieve both things. And then finally, the last example, other than playing with Lego people, which we enjoy doing, is around technology transfer. So we've got a discussion ongoing with the Science and Technology Facilities Council around what we can learn from technological innovation and what technological innovation can learn from us doing social stuff. Amongst other things, we're exploring whether or not it's possible to apply space technology for social benefit. The sort of stuff they've got on Mars now. How could we take some of that thinking, some of those gadgets, things, and apply them for social benefit? We've potentially got access to the intellectual property from places like CERN and the European Space Agency. Got no idea what any of this stuff means. But it's really interesting, and it's a bit different from what everybody else is doing. And every so often, one really interesting idea will appear, and we'll just go, that will work. And that will start to change the system, and it will start to change thinking, and maybe it will change the world eventually. So our tiny little organisation, starting with 6 local people, we're now talking about space technology in very big organisations who can make this stuff happen. A few barriers to be aware of. One of the problems, certainly that I'm experiencing around social innovation, is that when you say innovation, everybody assumes you mean science and technology. At the moment, there really is no clear policy, very few structures, routes, or finance for doing any of this stuff, and indeed, there's almost no research or knowledge in it. We had a literature review done. In the last 15 years globally, there have been 30 research papers on social innovation. So essentially, everything I do has no evidence base, no policy, no structures, no routes, no money, and everybody thinks you're doing something else. So we're on a winner That's what makes it really exciting, because it also means there's no rules. And you can get away with all sorts of stuff, and if you get it wrong, nobody can tell you. But what we need, and what's really important for this approach, for any sort of innovation, is that people like you, who are the thinkers, the creators, the designers, the activists, need other sorts of people. Those people that on here are called the connectors, the people who broker links, the entrepreneurs, the institutions that have the resources, have the power to make things happen. So actually being able to find those links, and the people who can really realise the idea, who can recognise what you're trying to do, and will be inspired by what you do. And they're always out there. There are always people who are interested if you can find them. Often they will not be the people who you think they're going to be. Many of the people who might be able to help won't even be inside your own system. But occasionally you just come across somebody and it will work. And as Woody Allen said, the secret of success in life is turning up. Get out there, go and meet people, and eventually you will find the right person who can make your idea a reality. This is a really, really important thing we're trying to work on, to enable more innovations to happen quicker. Because if ever there was a time to do this, it is now. In the sense for innovation, whilst austerity is bringing lots of negatives, for innovation, this is the best possible time to do this stuff. The bigger the cuts, the easier it's getting, from my perspective. So, just to finish off, for those of you who are not aware, there's a number of resources here. These are just three, which are open, not purely health related, but have other innovations on them as well. The top one, Social Innovation Exchange, which is a UK-based approach. Social Innovation Europe, what they're doing across the continent, and then things like the Global Innovation Academy, which, as I suggested, goes right the way across the globe. There are all sorts of people out there, all doing really, really interesting stuff. Really encourage you, if you're from a clinical background, look at innovations that aren't about healthcare. See what inspires you. See what sort of other ideas you could bring in. That's what creates innovation, in my view, is when you look outside of your normal arena. So if I'm talking to a prison, the last place I would look for inspiration or ideas is anything to do with criminal justice. And one last thing, Dave may have shown you this film. For those of you who know the TED website, there's a fantastic talk on there, a biologist who gives a talk, and it's called Why We Should Replace PowerPoint with Dance. And he's actually really deadly serious. He says, this is helping me to understand how biology works, by working with dancers. Because if I only work with scientists, I'll only ever think in one way, and we'll get stuck. And if you look at some of those fantastic stories of the great scientists of the last 100 years, Einstein, Richard Feynman, people like that, they all played. Up the road, we've got those two Russian guys who won the Nobel Prize a couple of years ago for inventing graphene. And if you look at what they do, they play. They're like children. They were playing with sellotape one day, essentially, and they suddenly realised there was this fantastic material that was on bits of sellotape. Now, they were smart enough to do the physics and all the interesting, serious stuff, but they created, apparently, what's the next wonder material, because they played, because they thought like children. And I think for most of us, as adults, we've been taught that we shouldn't play. It's a bad thing to do. You'll never achieve anything because you'll be really serious. Like when I worked inside the NHS, you must be a really good manager. And I eventually learned I was a terrible manager, because it's not what I do. We need lots of managers who can deliver stuff, but we also need a number of people who can play and enjoy themselves and have fun and occasionally come up with a fantastic idea. And I know that all of you here are like that, even though you may not believe it. There's all sorts of potential to do all sorts of amazing stuff. So I hope that's been a useful contribution. I apologise, I'm going to have to dash as soon as I've finished. Really great to see you all, including some of those of you I have met before. Do keep going. We need more ideas. And if you can bring the benefits of what you're doing to more and more local people, in your areas and further afield. There is nothing better you